Since Ari had remained heavily guarded under her father's watch her whole life, it was no surprise that she was under attack when she was alone and vulnerable. She slowly approached the ferocious-looking men. It was the man with the large stomach who raised his sword at her, and her eyes fluttered closed. She stood unafraid, awaiting her end, as she muttered her last prayers. That end never came, as she was instead met with the sound of iron striking iron. Her eyes flew open, and she beheld the broad back and long dark hair of the man she had wished to appear since the ferocious men arrived at the orphanage. She inadvertently took a step back to observe that he had deflected the attack of the enemy's sword. Wherever he had come from was a mystery to her, but streams of joy bubbled in her heart at the sight of him. In a brief suspended moment, he turned to her, and his rich forest green eyes locked on hers. In them were unspoken words of unquestionable assurance and fierce protection. Although he was a single man against 5 bloodthirsty men, the princess had never felt as assured of safety as she did in his presence. She was unsure if it was because her father boasted of his physical prowess or the fact that he had appeared out of nowhere, but she was quite certain he would not let harm come to her. In the next second, the sturdy soldier turned from her and skillfully unsheathed a dagger from his opponent's belt, thrusting it into his distended ale-rich stomach. The other men, as stunned as Ari was, stood frozen in bewilderment as their comrade dropped to the ground. The soldier, however, spared no time as he took advantage of their confusion. His sword was swift, and his movements agile. In a single slice motion, another man was taken down. The third bandit was on the ground with the dagger in his chest in another moment, but the fourth seemed more skilled than the rest. It was the man with the eye patch, whom she also assumed was the leader of the gang. He was able to engage her guard in an intense sword fight. The princess watched as her protector used his feet to kick the fifth, who attempted to assist his comrade, sending him crashing against some empty barrels. He did this while maintaining a good fight against his formidable opponent. Snapping out of her awe, the princess went into action, turning to the children whose safety was her priority. She urged them into the little reading room, where the others were, and received no objections as they looked horrified by what they had witnessed. Although it was the first time the young royal had seen any person get killed, she knew she had to be strong for the children and resisted the urge to empty whatever was in her stomach at that moment. After she had ensured the children were safely locked away, she turned back to the battle and saw the man who had been kicked against the barrels rise with a stagger and pull a dagger from the sheath strapped around his waist. She turned her eyes to see that her protector had just stabbed his opponent with his sword, which seemed quite deeply embedded in the man. She doubted that he would have enough time to retrieve his weapon to defend himself, so she acted on impulse and ran towards him, throwing herself in between her dark-haired savior and the impending attack. However, before she could get struck, she felt the grip of firm hands on her shoulders and was urgently tossed out of harm's way. She staggered from the impact, and by the time she regained balance she looked up to see her protector break the enemy's neck in one swift turn. Despite the horrific sight before her, she breathed out in relief, gladdened that even though he had been outnumbered, her savior emerged as the victor. It gave credence to all her father had claimed about him, and she could finally understand the king's insistence on making him her guard. "Are you hurt, princess?" her protector asked, turning slightly to her. Ari shook her head vehemently, as several questions swamped her mind. The most prominent being her desire to know how he had found her, as the chances that Nathan had divulged it to him were very slim. "Jarrett," she began, but before she had the opportunity to utter the questions that plagued her, she was interrupted by his voice, which sounded hoarser than she recalled it to be. "I do not like the name." The princess blinked in confusion at his words, as she could not for the life of her understand how it signified in their current predicament. She vaguely recalled asking a while before if he liked his name. He had told her it meant Iron Fist, and admitted, nonchalantly, that it had been given when he was in the army, because of his skill. At that time, he had not responded to the question. It was quite odd that he chose such a time to answer. She was just about to tell him her sentiments when she saw him stagger towards a pillar and rest his back. A cold feeling washed over her as she could behold from his side profile a dagger lodged in his stomach area. She had the alarming realization that he had been stabbed in her stead by the last thug. "Jarrett! Jarrett!" she called, running towards him as his eyes drooped and he slowly slid down the pillar. "Black Diamond."